And we owe it not only to the truth of the gospel, we also owe it to the people of South Africa. We are still suffering. We are a wounded country. But the wounds must be addressed and healed. The recovery process, we as Christians must lead in that recovery process. And that's why reconciliation is the medicine that should be applied to the South African society, Christian reconciliation.
Hello and welcome to the Follower Podcast, a place for honest conversations about following Jesus to the depths of his heart and the ends of the earth. I'm your host, Matthew Lewis, and I'm so glad that you have joined us. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Follower Podcast, and we're in this series of conversations around reconciliation. It's been challenging. It's been meaningful in a lot of ways for me to have these conversations with different people from different parts of the world who've walked through this. And I feel like this episode is not going to be any exception to that. We have two incredible men on the podcast with us. I've only just met them 5 minutes ago as we were chatting, but the little bit I've read about them and where they're from, I'm really excited to learn from both of them. So we have Cornelis Janse van Rensburg and Edwin Arrison. Welcome to the Follower Podcast. So good to have you guys with us.
Good to be with you, Matt, and also with your listeners.
Yes.
Wonderful to be with you. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you, man. And thank you for making the time. I wonder if we could just start with brief introductions. Maybe Edwin, maybe you could go first, and then Cornelis, you could go after that. Tell us a little bit about yourselves, the work that you do, and maybe what brought you to the work of reconciliation that you're involved in.
So about me, I'm an Anglican priest in South Africa. I was ordained in 1992 as a priest. Archbishop Tutu ordained me. You know, he has always been a mentor for me, and I mean, to be honest, I really miss him. But he remains the inspiration for me around the talk about reconciliation. And so if I quote him too much today, please forgive me. But he is the person who I look up to in terms of this whole conversation about reconciliation. I'm married to Desiree. We have two daughters. The one is a rugby commentator, actually.
I love that. That's so great. I read that and I thought, man, what a cool thing. Yeah.
So those of you who are interested in rugby, you will see her on various different matches, either commentating or broadcasting.
Oh, what a cool thing. And then your other daughter, she's studying, you said?
She is at Stellenbosch University, yes. Okay. She's now in her final year studying psychology.
Okay, fantastic. And Cornelis, a little bit about yourself.
Well, Matthew, I'm a minister in the Dutch Reformed Church. I've been ordained in 1988 already. And as you will know, the Dutch Reformed Church was involved in creating apartheid as a system and in support of apartheid. And so you can imagine that coming into ministry in 1988 was at that particular time, if you came into ministry in 1998, you were involved in the creation of a new South Africa, the start of a new dispensation. So right from the beginning, we were drawn into that. Although already as a student, we've been very much involved in the whole resistance and thinking about apartheid, resistance to the ideology. But then I got into ministry and got involved at various levels in reconciliatory work. So then eventually it was a whole process. Let me just say about myself, I'm married to Aletta with 4 children, of which 3 of them are married. Wonderful family
Wow.
to have. My children are all they're beautiful children, as you can imagine. I think they're the most beautiful children.
Not biased, not
Yeah,
biased.
I'm not biased. Yeah, my yeah. So I've become a leader in our church, served in leadership positions, and in that capacity, I were very involved in reconciliation work, and yeah, we can talk about it later.
Thank you for sharing that from both of you. Yeah, much I could say there, but I think we're gonna keep moving forward. When we say this word reconciliation, obviously you both listening a little bit to your stories must have much experience in this. But I say the word, what are some of the first things that come to mind when you hear that word? Important things for us to be thinking about as we consider this idea.
So the word reconciliation and the word unity are one of a kind, as it were. I think it's impossible to speak about reconciliation without speaking about unity, and how to create unity between people. And then one has to almost think about the opposite of reconciliation. What is the opposite? It's when people are in relationships of hatred, of of discontent with each other. And we see that around the world today in terms of the wars happening right now. And so for me, reconciliation is a critical conversation to have, even if some people do not want to have the conversation. And I think part of the reason why some people do not want to have the conversation is because we have been guilty of a kind of a false reconciliation. And so in order to avoid that, we need to reclaim the word reconciliation and ensure that the word itself doesn't become discredited, because if the word itself is discredited, then we cannot have a conversation about reconciliation.
Can I pull on that thread a little bit there, Edwin? So I've had this experience, even in preparation for the series, telling people we're going to record a few conversations around reconciliation. And some people get excited about that, but other people that you can almost see the eyes rolling, oh, that again, and that's such an important thought that you've pulled out there. There's a false reconciliation, and then the actual thing. Maybe give us some of the contours of that. What is this false reconciliation that people are pressing against, and then the true one, this unity that you're speaking about?
Yeah. So the false reconciliation, some people call it kumbaya reconciliation. We pretend that things are okay. We do not build deep relationships with one another. One of the things I appreciate about Cornelis is that we have been able to have a journey where we are able to build a relationship with one another, and we do not have to agree on everything. But what we do agree on is that we are fundamentally all made in the image of God.
Right.
That's the fundamental thing.
Right.
We agree that there needs to be unity in the church in order for the church to be a symbol of reconciliation in society. So we can disagree. I mean, you can support the Blue Bulls, I can support the Stormers. That's okay.
I will not support the Blue Bulls. I will not.
For those listening, those are two big rugby teams in South Africa, and they're both wrong, because clearly the Sharks are the best. But we won't talk about that.
Not going there.
But we can if once we agree on the fundamentals, then the conversation about reconciliation becomes real and becomes possible.
Matthew, maybe it's important to give just another perspective on this. As Christians, we start in our thinking with the reconciliation, the act of God to reconcile himself with us. And that's an act of total grace. So for Christians, in the essence of reconciliation, it starts with grace. It starts with love. And that grace isn't something that you just receive. It's something that changes you. If you truly accept the grace of God and you receive that grace, it has to have a profound effect on your total identity as being a person of grace. You become a person of grace. If you accept the grace of God, you have to change.
Yeah.
It sometimes bothers me when I hear Christians speak without that grace. Now, then I can't help to wonder, and I'm not trying to judge. It's not a judgmental thing, but it bothers me that you can call yourself a Christian but don't act with grace. Because it's supposed to change you profoundly. So when you are confronted with broken relationships, and in our countries, especially the broken relationships from the past, and you meet these other Christian women and men, you're supposed to approach them and engage in a mode of grace. It's like a imperative of being Christian. It's not something on the periphery of our Christian life. You have to be reconciliatory, conveying something of the grace that you received from God and from your fellow Christians, and then transfer that into all your relationships.
Right.
So maybe if that's your point of departure, then it changes everything that you do in relationships, especially with your brothers and sisters with who you had bad relationships or broken relationships. And then you have to, with that attitude, you have to look deep into yourself and try to find all the reasons why other people think you hurt them.
Very, very profound thoughts there, Niels. And what I'd love, if we can, not to go too far off of the point here, but so this word grace, it's like a really big word in the Christian lexicon. So in our faith, huge word, right? But there may be some people listening in who are interested in this idea of reconciliation, but what do we mean by grace? So just give us a little sense of that. When you say our whole faith is built on grace, that should make us people of grace, unpack that word grace and why that's such a big word for us.
For me, it translates into respect. It translates into acknowledgement of our common humanity. And that's why it's always also counting and also applicable to those who are not Christian. As a Christian, I look at people differently. And I look at them with respect, with acknowledgement of the humanity, you being human. I look at them with the idea that our relationship should have a purpose. From the role that we play out within our relationship must point to the grace of God. So it changes everything.
Yeah. Edwin, any thoughts off the back of that?
Well, in South Africa, the two words grace and race are important. And because we are so deeply embedded in racism in this country, We need the thing that changes that is grace. You once you understand that that God doesn't make distinctions between people, that begins to fill you with God's grace.
Yeah.
And I like the emphasis that Cornelis had, is that the initiative always comes from God. That's where it starts. It doesn't start with. It starts with God's work. And once we understand that, we simply become part of a stream, as it were, of a path that God has already opened up for us. And that's why you see we can do this with joy. It doesn't become a burden. It becomes something that we know we cannot fail at, because it's the work of God. And so, people don't want to sometimes talk about race in South Africa, but I say to them, if the only way to overcome the issue of race is through grace. Right.
That's why, Matthew, the whole issue of reconciliation and unity amongst churches, it witness to the essence of our faith. And I think that's why Jesus say, people, through your unity, people will know. Because it witnessed to the essence of our faith. It's not something on the periphery of our Christian life.
I think, as you guys are sharing, I think about that saying of the ground is level at the foot of the cross, right? The ground is level at the foot of the cross, and how so much of this othering, because you spoke about this deep connection between reconciliation and unity, and the othering, which is that you are different to me. A lot of that is still built in the ego. And there's still sort of these remnants of pride. I'm better than you, I deserve something, etc. And we haven't yet allowed those things to fall away and realize how level that ground is at the foot of the cross of Jesus. Does that relate?
Well, that's the one thing that I've been taught on my journey with reconciliation processes. There's no place for ego.
Right.
If you approach reconciliation from in an egoistic manner, it's doomed, and you will create a monster.
Yeah. Also, I think, and this is where my point about systems become important. It is the Christian faith. The way it's been presented to us often in this country is that we are somehow superior to others. And really, that is something that we as Christians must lose. All people have been created in God's image. We do bring something unique to the conversation. And so in my conversation with Muslims and Jews and people of no faith or whatever, I'm very clear that, the Christian faith and the Christian church does bring something unique. But what we do not bring is, we do not bring superiority. And an attitude of superiority, and it's only when we approach this with humility, and see how best we can serve people, because at the end of the day, Jesus says, "I have not come to be served, but to serve." And if service is at the root of what we do, then all things become possible.
Yes, I love that. I'd love to pull on that just a little bit, because I really resonate with what you're saying. And really trusting the wisdom here that I can glean. I find it's a tension in myself when I read the scriptures, Genesis through Revelation, the whole big story that we're a part of. I see God selecting a people for himself, this nation of Israel, how that then unfolds to a people, no longer Jew, Gentile, how there's this people that have been set apart for God. I can understand how sometimes a certain reading of that can lead us to an understanding of this group of people that are somehow, in your language, superior to other people. But I can understand that, because God, we do see in that story that God kind of set apart a nation for his purposes. And yet for me, it's like, okay, but who's the image of the God that we're saved into, that we're rescued into? What kind of people are we called to be as those people who God has invited to participate with him in his kingdom. I don't know, thoughts around that and some of the tensions in that idea.
So I encourage people to really, really, really read the Gospels and the life of Jesus. When they start doing that with any level of seriousness, they will discover that Jesus is born, and it's not the chief priests and the rabbis don't even know that this is happening. It's the ordinary poor people, the shepherds in the field, who are the first ones to get the message. When the three wise men arrive, they are from the east. They are people from a different nation and area, and they come to give homage to Jesus. When Jesus started his ministry, people must just read Luke chapter 4, and how he addresses his own people. And he says to them, he tells them two stories. He tells them the story of the woman, the widow of Zarephath, and he tells them the story of Naaman the Syrian. Two people from outside the community. And he says to them, and they want to crucify him, they want to kill him because of this.
Yeah.
And so I'm simply, and it's really an appeal I'm making, is for people to understand who Jesus is. Not this false picture of Jesus, but the picture of Jesus recorded in the Gospels. That's all they need to do.
Yeah. Niels, any thoughts on that?
No, I can't agree with Edwin anymore. He's perfectly right. And if you look at the openness of the first movement of the Pentecost Day itself, that open space there of people from so many languages, from across the world there, the known world of that time there, it's very significant to read that. To know that the story of the eunuch on the wagon on his way to Gaza from Ethiopia. That's how the gospel starts to move right at the beginning of that whole narrative of the spreading of the gospel. It's like it's significant. It's significant. So we have to understand that the gospel, it can't be captured by any people or by any race or by any.
So important. Yeah.
And say, listen, this is our gospel, and we're sharing it with you out of a position of benevolence. And let's just say that we've done that. It's been done in the past that people captured the gospel.
Right.
So it's our gospel, and we're going to share it with you in a kind of benevolence. We are very kind. We will share this with you as if it's ours, and in some way we kept the power.
Right.
We shared the gospel but kept the power. And the sharing of the gospel is to release the power. And to say, listen, we become servants. And that's what Jesus did. He shared the gospel by becoming a servant. Maybe, Matthew, in this discussion about reconciliation, we have to just mention something that's, I believe it's very important. Because the issue is constantly raised in our discussions on reconciliation, is this whole thing about restitution. Because reconciliation, for some people, it can only become sort of a verbal thing, not an embodiment of grace, but sort of like you have in the secular world, an arrangement with one another that we will be kind to one another in future. The Christian reconciliation is different. It's not only availing yourself, it's giving yourself. It's servanthood. It's a mutual servanthood that must evolve from sharing your narratives and talking about it and praying together and whatever. But there's a reciprocity in that. But when you have wronged your brother and your sister, you have responsibility after that.
Right.
Yeah.
And then embody what you verbally convey, what you confess, or whatever.
Yeah, beautiful. I want to make sure that, so if you've been listening to this and you're like, wow, that went fast. So let me make sure we land this point, and then I'd love to talk a little bit about Genadendal. But so for those of you listening, basically what these guys are sharing with us is, I think about when in the scriptures it says, in the face of Christ is the glory of God. And Jesus says of himself, he says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And it really matters what you think about when you think about God, because whatever's in your mind, you're ultimately going to live into that image. And what we're saying is that Jesus is the lens through which we interpret God. All things must find their place in him. So there's nothing in God that doesn't look like Jesus. And that's what we're saying. So the fancy language would be that like Jesus, we have a Christ hermeneutic, right? So Jesus is our lens through which we read the whole Bible. And if that's true, then regardless of what we do or don't think about who's saved and who's not saved and all those kinds of things, the question is, are we saved into a faith that carries the likeness of Christ? That's the fundamental question. And if we're saved into a faith that carries the likeness of Christ, well, then definitively Jesus is a servant. And one of the great dangers is when we co-opt Jesus, so we make him the poster boy for our political ideology or our social agenda or whatever the thing is, our personal preference, and we hold Jesus out as a way of kind of sanctifying and blessing our ideas instead of bowing our knee to his lordship and coming under his way of living. And the reconciliation that we're dreaming about, this unity, is really a product of a life that's kind of given itself to the way of Jesus, not just confessing Jesus for my purposes. Do you think that would sum up some of what we've been saying here, guys?
I think so, and I think it's important that we also say to one another that our faith is often governed by ideology. It is we are not always conscious of it. But it's actually ideology that predetermines the faith, rather than Jesus being the first factor, and then everything else follows after that.
Totally love that. Yeah, and I think jump in, Niels, jump in.
No. You're totally right. Our reconciliation process starts with identification with Jesus.
Yeah, and it's so simple, hey. Actually,
it's a total identification with the person of Jesus. It's in the relationship with Jesus.
Yeah.
The living Christ. It's not, if it comes from another place, and may I just say, Edwin is correct again. The fact is, many of our actions across racial boundaries, especially, are not necessarily driven by our faith, but by ideology. And we have to be conscious the whole time, careful, aware of the possibility that it can happen with any one of us.
Right.
Yeah.
That you default into an ideological position rather than from the position of from the relationship with Christ.
Totally. And probably a sober and honest awareness that is the case. There's a need for constant repentance, because we're acting in this world that's always acting on us.
That's what, and the danger is much stronger when you involved in relationships across racial boundaries, when you're sitting separately somewhere in a kind of an echo chamber of people, and you're not exposed to all the perspectives and all the cultural views, etc., and you become separated in some way from various perspectives on the gospel views. I've been in a community yesterday where I had a view from a different community to the city in which I live, and immediately I saw something totally different from what I'm used to. And it changed my perspective. It changed my view.
Right. And I think what I really appreciate about both of you is that you're not just talking about this hypothetically. You are practitioners of this. You're living this out in your life. And one of the specific stories that I'd love for us to share now is the story of Genadendal and everything that happened there and how that came together and your experience of reconciliation in and through that. So maybe, Edwin, we could start with you and then over to Cornelis.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. And I mean, the Genadendal story is one that that Christians in this country don't even know about, unfortunately. And it's the foundational story of Christianity in South Africa because the Moravians were the first to send missionaries to the southernmost point of Africa to work amongst the Khoi people, the indigenous people of the land. And what was significant about that is that they did not see the original people of the land as alien. They saw the possibility that these people could become our brothers and our sisters through Christ. And so, having taken that decision, the first missionary, Georg Schmidt was his name. He worked amongst the Khoi people in Genadendal. Of course, where our story then meets with the NG Kerk is that he was going to baptize some of the Khoi people, and because he was not an ordained pastor, they were very upset about this. They were also upset, by the way, for those who don't know, that the bell was ringing at Genadendal, which is like 60 kilometers away from Stellenbosch, and the bell was disturbing them in Stellenbosch. And anyway, he was then told to leave the country. And a woman called Verhetge, while she was baptized, Maria Magdalena, she then continued the work for another 50 years. And here it is again. I mean, the three of us are men sitting in this. But the profound role of women in the reconciliation process, we must never forget that. In fact, the first people to share the good news that Jesus is alive were women, Mary Magdalene.
Right.
And I think in the church, unless we men say this and actually practice that equality with women as well, we are never going to understand what reconciliation really is about. And so I was very privileged to work with Cornelis, work with the heads of the Moravian Church, Martin Abrams, and bring them together. And I mean, both their hearts were so open to this conversation. And so it's actually just a privilege for me to be involved and to sit in these conversations. And when we actually had the pilgrimage, the physical pilgrimage to Genadendal, it was there where Cornelis, in a way, expressed the heart of Christ to that congregation. And the congregation accepted it immediately because it was so authentic. And so that I think is one of the good news stories of our time.
Beautiful. And from your
May I
perspective,
just add?
Niels?
No, I can just add to what Edwin already said. This was one of the most profound experiences I've ever had on a journey of reconciliation. We're still in debt, and when we say this, there are so much still to be done in our relationship with the Uniting Reformed Church. We are still not doing what we should be doing. So let me just say, when I'm talking about reconciliation, I'm not talking like somebody who have been successful and can say that we did great. We just received so much grace on that journey. But yeah, I just want to put that disclaimer on, because it's not like I'm claiming that I'm talking about myself and the church I represented, that we are this huge successful. We did much, but not nearly enough. And yeah, we in the process of reconciliation with the Moravian Church, we accepted the fact that we, as a church, and many years ago, centuries ago, wronged them and kept on doing that. And when we moved away from apartheid and repented about apartheid, we did nothing to go back to the Moravian Church and say, listen, and that's 30 years, 88. In 86 already we repented about apartheid, and in 1990. But we did nothing to go back to the Moravian Church and say, listen, we want to repent about the brokenness of the body of Christ in which you suffered, being sent by God to come and work in the southern part of the world, of Africa. And yeah, so when we got the opportunity, it was just the right thing to do. And what evolved from that was a great relationship between us and the Moravian Church. As recently as the Day of Ascension, now the recent Day of Ascension, we got together, and the Moravian Church choir from Belleville, they performed in our church in the service, and Martin Abrams and myself, became great friends, and
it's so great.
We very often have sort of contact with one another, but not only the two of us, our people from our churches. So, and we're building on that, and we keeping the flame of hope burning. So, because we dreamt of a process that will expand to all our other relationships too. So yeah, but the Genadendal experience was very significant.
What does the word Genadendal, what does that mean?
It's a valley of grace. So Genade is grace, and Dal is a valley, so the veil of grace. Yeah.
Valley of grace.
And that's why grace became such an important word in this particular journey.
Right. And so for those of you who are listening who maybe didn't know the whole story, and correct me here, but what I've understood is what you've described is the first Moravian missionaries came to South Africa, and they were actually some of the first missionaries to South Africa, and established this church. And then they were having effective ministry with the indigenous people at the time. And then they were wanting to baptize those people. And there was conflict between them and then the Dutch Reformed Church at that space. And the missionary was then sent away from South Africa, but the local people carried on ministering. And from that point, there was sort of maybe this rift that then was established between those two churches. But now recently as a body, you guys went back, and the Dutch Reformed Church sort of asked for forgiveness, and there was mercy and grace extended. And now there's been this reconciliation of those churches. And that's just really significant in the story of Christianity in South Africa. Does that sort of sum up what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely.
Very well. And may I just say, Matthew, we will forever be thankful for the role that Edwin played and Suckley played and other fellow Christians played to bring us together and to bring about this reconciliation, because we could have lived with this for many years if we haven't become aware of the pain that still exists.
Yeah. And if I may add, sorry, Cornelis, if I may add, the one lesson I think perhaps we can learn from this is that someone like myself, who was completely outside of the Moravian Church and the Dutch Reformed Church, I'm an Anglican,
right?
And I was able to play a particular kind of role. And today, I mean, if we're going to talk, say, in other conflict situations, let's just say between the Israelis and the Palestinians, for example,
sure,
we can play that role, as South Africans or South African Christians in particular. We can as outsiders, as people who are not, there and part of that particular conflict, we can be agents of reconciliation in that. I think I've said to Niels before and to others that, Christians from within the Dutch Reformed Church or from within the evangelical churches can go to Israel and speak to the Christians or to the people in Israel there. Some of us can speak to the Palestinians, and we can bring people together. So reconciliation is a real possibility if we're willing to work at it, but we must be committed to it.
Wow, what a great challenge. I'm aware of time, and I mean, this is such a rich and deep conversation. I think we could keep going for a long time, but I'm wanting to bring this to a close. And I'm wondering, as we close, is there anything that's still burning on your heart, either one of you, where you go, and if we didn't say this, we would have missed it?
Well, if I may just say that we in the churches, those of us who claim to be followers of Christ, we must do all we can to work towards reconciliation in our own midst. So Niels earlier mentioned the reconciliation between the NG Kerk and the Uniting Reformed Church. The day when those two churches unite, there will be much rejoicing in heaven. And imagine, you can just imagine the white and the black Dutch Reformed Church in this country becoming one. In 2 years from now, we will have the 40th anniversary of something called the Belhar Confession. I really, I'm saying to my friends in both the Dutch Reformed Church and also in the VG Kerk, we cannot celebrate this document in 2 years from now if we have not made significant steps. So the body of Christ is being challenged. The body of Christ in South Africa is being challenged. And if we can, what happened with the Moravians and the NG Kerk is a small little thing compared to this.
Wow.
If this begin to happen, and certainly myself and others within other denominations, we stand ready to be there and to help shepherd this particular journey with our Reformed sisters and brothers. And the hope of this is that we know of situations like the Moravian and NG Kerk situations where things have changed, and therefore knowing that there are examples where things have changed and can change, that says to us that we must not despair. There is always hope. And therefore we can move forward in that hope.
Wonderful.
Absolutely so. And the reconciliation between the Uniting Reformed Church and the Dutch Reformed Church is of paramount importance for the gospel in South Africa. It's about the truth of the gospel. We believe that the Spirit can change people and it can reconcile people. And here we have an example where it's not happening. It's a very, very strong and significant example where it's not happening. It's about the witness to the power of the Spirit. And so this is more important than anything. It's like a blemish on the truth that we proclaim. So it's so important. And the 40th year anniversary is coming up, and we've been in the desert now for 38 years. So it's time to get out of this desert now. And we owe it not only to the truth of the gospel, we also owe it to the people of South Africa.
Yeah.
We owe it to the brokenness of South Africa. It won't help to say, listen, this country is wounded. We still suffer from our wounds from the past. And that's a truth that we will have to carry with us for many years to come, still to come. We are still suffering. We are a wounded country. But the wounds must be addressed and healed. The recovery process, we as Christians must lead in that recovery process. And that's why reconciliation is the medicine that should be applied to the South African society, Christian reconciliation.
Wow.
And that's why proponents of reconciliation should be supported. And Edwin spoke about the situation in Palestine. If we're serious about reconciliation in South Africa, we should be serious about reconciliation outside of South Africa too. You can't be serious about the one and not about the other. And I just say, if it wasn't for people and Christians who were serious about the reconciliation and the rebuilding of our country, we wouldn't have been here where we are now. They journeyed with us during the dark days of apartheid and encouraged us and supported us and made very, very, very significant contributions to the debate in South Africa. And we should return the compliment to wherever it's necessary. And the situation in Israel-Palestine is a perfect example where the Christians of the world should engage. And very much so, the churches of South Africa, having a very recent experience of what happened in South Africa. We're the one church, part of the ecumenical church that should respond to what's happening in Israel-Palestine. Because we have recent knowledge of the benefits of a reconciliatory process and what can happen when the gospel of Christ come to work in a community.
Wonderful thoughts. Well, thank you so much, Edwin. Thank you so much, Cornelis. I think the landing thought for me there is that it starts with us, starts with the church, really. And so if you're listening to this and you consider yourself a follower of Jesus, there's need for much reconciliation all over the world in so many different places. And amen to that. But let's have a look at our own communities of faith. Let's have a look at our church and ask ourselves, have we entered into the spirit of reconciliation so that we might be an example of that to the world? Thank you, both of you, for your time. It's been lovely to have you on. I'll put a link to the documentary video of the Genadendal story in the show notes, so you can go have a look at that there. And we'll see you all next time on the Follower Podcast. That's all for this episode of the Follower Podcast. If you found this helpful, please consider liking, sharing, subscribing, and leaving a review on the podcast. It helps us get these conversations in other people's ears. You can also give a once-off donation or ongoing monthly support to make more conversations like this possible by visiting www.wearefollower.com. Until next time, friends, may you follow Jesus to the depths of his heart and to the ends of the earth.